Welcome to everyone, and many thanks to the 300 people who have joined us today. My name is Kimberly Otis, and I'm Director of the Caring Economics Campaign. Today's webinar is a new offering of the Caring Economics Campaign, and we are delighted at the tremendous response to the invitation to today's program. This one-hour webinar will consist of two parts. First, a presentation by Dr. Riane Eisler, followed by a question and answer period. Please type your questions into the chat bar on your screen, and we will pose as many of them as possible to Dr. Eisler during the interactive session. Since there are so many of you, we will be grouping similar questions together, and please know that we invite you to become more involved in this work after today. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CPS website. So if you wish to refer your friends and colleagues to this free webinar, you will be able to do so. Before introducing Dr. Eisler, the Caring Economics Campaign, briefly described, is a research, advocacy, and grassroots organizing project of the Center for Partnership Studies, or CPS. The campaign was inspired by the outpouring of interest in the new approach outlined in Dr. Eisler's most recent book, The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics. The campaign has three major programs, starting with the Real Wealth Public Policy Initiative, based here in Washington, D.C., and governed by an advisory council of expert stakeholders. It is focused on providing alternative economic indicators to GDP and is ensuring a focus on the status of the majority, women and children. Recently, CPS commissioned a report by the Urban Institute, renowned for its work on metrics, called The State of Society, Measuring Economic Success and Human Well-Being, and is posted on the website partnershipway.org. This report has so far been endorsed by a diverse coalition of organizations representing over 30 million people. A second element is the Real Wealth Program, which began as a training program last November when over 60 grassroots leaders from around the country gathered in Seattle for a weekend training program. And I know some of you with us today were there. We will soon be providing online trainings so that you can become a certified conversation leader, and you can find out more by emailing Sarah Saltee at center@partnershipway.org. The third component is the Caring Economics Internet campaign, which is now being launched with a team at Fenton Communications, and we are fortunate to have Dr. Mary Kirk as our lead staff person. I am now honored to introduce our presenter for today, Dr. Riane Eisler. I first heard Dr. Eisler speak at the National Press Club when The Real Wealth of Nations was released, and I became inspired to action, as I know many of you have been. Dr. Eisler is the co-founder and president of the Center for Partnership Studies, which was founded in 1987, over 23 years ago, after her international bestseller, The Chalice and the Blade, galvanized millions of readers worldwide. She is a pioneer in many fields, including education and parenting, human rights, women's rights, peace studies, and most importantly for today, a new roadmap for our economy. Dr. Eisler is the author of many other books, including the award-winning Power of Partnership and Tomorrow's Children. She has also authored and co-authored Sacred Pleasure, Women, Men, and the Global Quality of Life, and the Equal Rights Handbook, all available at the CPS website, again, www.partnershipway.org. As mentioned before, today's presentation is based on Dr. Eisler's latest book, The Real Wealth of Nations, Creating a Caring Economics, hailed by Archbishop Desmond Tutu as a template for the better world we have been so urgently seeking, by Peter Senge of MIT as desperately needed, by Gloria Steinem as revolutionary, and by Jane Goodall as a call for action. In that spirit, I am sure that you will be equally moved today to a call to action in today's webinar with Dr. Riane Eisler. Dr. Eisler?
Thank you, Kim, for that lovely welcome and introduction. And I also want to thank Sarah Salti for the great visuals you're about to see, and to thank all of you for joining us on this, our first CPS webinar about an enterprise that I am passionately committed to, not only through my research, writing, and advocacy, but as a mother and grandmother deeply concerned, as so many of us are, about what kind of world our children will inherit. And this is the exciting and, yes, challenging enterprise of shifting to an economic system that accomplishes what economic systems are supposed to do, to provide for human welfare, for human development, and for a sustainable and healthy natural environment. And that's just what we will be talking about today. Now, many of us realize how urgent this enterprise is at this time of unprecedented economic, environmental, and social challenges. But all too often, we think, well, there's just nothing we can do. In reality, there is a great deal each one of us can do once we recognize what Einstein said, that we can't solve problems with the same thinking that created them. And this is what we will be looking at, is at economics from a new perspective, because we've all been taught to think of economics in terms of capitalism versus socialism, and certainly to move forward, we must incorporate the best elements of earlier systems. But we have to go further. What we urgently need are new economic systems that recognize something that once articulated may seem perfectly obvious. This is that the real wealth of nations, of our world, is not financial. And we certainly saw that, didn't we, in the melting into thin air of all those credit swaps and derivatives. Our real wealth consists of the contributions of people and of nature. So we need what we have not had, an economic system that gives visibility and real value to the most important human work, the work of caring for people starting in early childhood and caring for our Mother Earth. Now, people may do a double take, just hearing caring and economics in the same sentence. But isn't that a terrible comment on the uncaring values we've learned to accept as driving economics? Not having a more caring economic system, of course, has always caused enormous suffering, enormous damage to humans and to our planet. But now we need a caring economics more than ever before, not only to effectively address global warming and prevent other environmental catastrophes, and to finally change the misery of chronic poverty and hunger, but for purely economic reasons. And by this, I don't only mean to prevent repeated economic bubbles, recessions, and depressions, but because we're in the midst of a seismic technological shift, a seismic technological shift that it consists of the move to the post-industrial knowledge service economy, a time when automation and at an ever more rapid clip, robotics, are replacing humans in manufacturing and other jobs, a time when we have an opportunity to redefine what is and is not productive work, a time when economists tell us that the most important factor for economic success is what they like to call high-quality human capital, flexible, creative, innovative people, people with highly developed capacities. But you know, developing these capacities doesn't just happen in universities. Psychology and now neuroscience show that whether people develop these capacities or not largely hinges on the quality of care children receive starting very early on. So to move to an economic system that is not only more humane and environmentally sustainable, but also more successful, we need policies and practices that give value and visibility to caring and caregiving. So how do we accomplish this? Here are 6 basic steps, basic actions every one of you can take individually and through your organizations. 1, make the economic case for caring. 2, change measures of economic health. 3, rethink values. 4, accelerate the shift from domination to partnership. 5, make the gender connection. 6, change business and social policy. The first step, the first action, is making the economic case for caring economics by showing that caring pays very well in purely financial terms. Because some people will immediately say, wait a minute, caring, caregiving, all this soft, fuzzy stuff, that's not economically effective. So it's our job, your job, to show that in reality it is very economically effective. When countries invest in caring for people, starting in childhood, as I will get to presently, the financial return on this investment in human capacity building is enormous. Not only that, businesses that adopt caring policies also reap huge rewards. To give you just one example out of hundreds of studies that many of them are in my book, In the Real Wealth of Nations, companies that are regularly on the Working Mothers or Fortune 500 lists of the best companies to work for, companies with good health care, child care, flex time, parental leave, and other caring policies, they have a substantially higher return to investors. So we've got to change how people think and talk about economics. But that is not enough. The second action, and it too is basic, is to promote changes in how economic health is measured. Actually, this is foundational, because what is not measured is not visible and is not included in social and economic policies. So changing economic measures is therefore a top priority for our Center for Partnership Studies Caring Economics campaign. The conventional economic measure you read about in your newspapers, GDP or gross domestic product, obviously does not describe people's economic realities. U.S. GDP has been going up at the same time that unemployment, poverty, foreclosures have also been rising exponentially. We need economic measures that go way beyond this, economic measures that take into account what I call a full spectrum economic map. Not only the market, government, and illegal economic sectors, but also the 3 other sectors that are not being counted, that are actually the foundations of economic health. The life-sustaining activities that take place in the household economy, the natural economy, and the volunteer community economy. And GDP does not give any value to these essential activities. In fact, GDP and GNP, these conventional measures, actually include activities that harm and even take life. Making cigarettes, the medical bills, the funeral bills, they're just great for GDP. Oil spills, they're wonderful for GDP, the cleanup costs, the lawsuits, and so on. But not only do these conventional economic measures, which are so inadequate that they would be funny if the consequences weren't so serious, not only do they put negatives on the plus side, they give absolutely no visibility and no economic value to the activities that contribute the most to human well-being. The activities without which none of us would be here, without which there would be no workforce. The life-sustaining activities of the household economy, the volunteer community economy, and the natural economy. So an old stand of trees is not included in GDP until it's chopped down. But the fact that we need trees to breathe, that's ignored. Similarly, the caring and caregiving work performed in households is given no value whatsoever. Now, some people will again object by arguing, well, there's just no way to quantify the value of this work. And again, the reality is very different. In reality, not only can this work be quantified, but it's already being quantified. For instance, a Swiss government report showed that if the unpaid household work were included, and a huge part of that work is the caring work, traditionally considered, quote, women's work, whether done by a woman or a man. If it were included, it would comprise 70%, 70% of the reported Swiss GDP. Other so-called satellite national reports show a contribution of 30 to 50%. Yet even in the alternative economic measures now being developed, this essential work is still not included. And this is why the Center for Partnership Studies commissioned a report from the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C., who are noted for their work on metrics, to survey the alternatives being proposed. And this report, The State of Society, Measuring Economic Success and Human Well-Being, which you can download on our website, makes 3 essential recommendations. First, that the emerging new measures must include the enormous economic value of the work of caring and caregiving in both the market and non-market economic sectors. Second, that they pay attention to still marginalized populations, women, children, minorities, groups based on race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, and so forth. And third, that they take into account the enormous predictive value of the status of women and the related status of children for both quality of life and long-term economic success, a subject I'll get back to. As Kim said, leaders representing 30 million people have already signed on to back these recommendations. And I want to invite you to get your organizations to sign on, to become engaged, to back these recommendations, and yes, to also become fully engaged in our Caring Economics campaign, so we can make sure that our economic indicators give value to what really is valuable. And this takes me to the third area for action, changing conventional thinking about values, because economics is basically about what is or is not valued. Now, classical economists will say, well, what's valued is a matter of supply and demand, and that is part of it. But much more important are the underlying cultural values that are so unconsciously entrenched that we're often not even aware of them. Let me give you an example. Professions that do not involve caregiving, plumbing and engineering. I mean, they may be done by caring people, but the work does not involve caregiving. These professions are paid far more than those that do, like child care and elementary school teaching. So in the United States, people think nothing of paying the plumber, the person to whom we entrust our pipes, $50 to $100 an hour. But child care workers, the people to whom we entrust our children, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, get an average wage of only $10 per hour with no benefits. And we demand that plumbers have some training, but not that all child care workers have training. Now, this is obviously not logical. It's actually pathological. But to understand and change this distorted system of values, we have to go deeper to the kind of society that will support a more caring economic system, which in turn takes us to the fourth area for action, the work of cultural transformation. And here we're back again to the need for new thinking, of accelerating the movement from domination systems to partnership systems, the two new social categories introduced by my research and now being used by many others, scholars, students, activists, people at large. The reason that these social categories of partnership and domination systems are gradually gaining currency is that unlike conventional categories, like right versus left, religious versus secular, capitalist versus socialist, Eastern versus Western, and so on, they help us answer the most basic question for our future, the question of what kind of social conditions, what kinds of social configurations support or inhibit the expression of our human capacities for consciousness, caring, and creativity rather, because we have those too, than for insensitivity, cruelty, and destructiveness. Now, the good news is that there's already strong movement in a partnership direction. And we see this in many world regions, especially in the nations that today regularly rank high, not only in the United Nations annual Human Development Reports, but in the World Economic Forum's annual Global Competitiveness Reports. Nordic nations such as Sweden, Norway, and Finland. At the beginning of the 20th century, these nations were so poor that people fled famines in droves. Whole American states, Minnesota, were populated by them. So how did they change? And a major factor is that they started to really invest in caring for their people. These nations have government-supported child care, universal health care, stipends to help families care for children, elder care with dignity, generous paid parental leave for both mothers and fathers, policies we don't yet have in the United States, policies we urgently need so that we stop falling behind other industrialized nations as we have been in both quality of life and economic competitiveness, so that we can realistically talk about balancing life and work, as is the case in these nations, which even have Social Security credit, as in Norway, for the first 7 years of caring for a child, whether by a woman or a man. But, and this takes us back to the need for cultural transformation, none of this happened in a vacuum. It happened as these nations moved more toward the partnership side of the domination partnership continuum, because it's always a matter of degree. And here I want to clarify, for those of you not familiar with these social categories, that by partnership system I do not mean a completely flat organization. There are hierarchies, as there must be. We need parents, teachers, managers, leaders. But they're what I call hierarchies of actualization rather than domination. Hierarchies that are used not to disempower but to empower others. Nor do I mean just working together. People work together all the time in domination systems. Terrorists cooperate, monopolies cooperate, invading armies cooperate. What I mean is the configuration that if you look at Nordic nations, is today struggling to emerge, albeit against enormous resistance and, yes, periodic regressions. The first part of this configuration is more democracy in both the family and the state, and there is no real democracy without both. The second is a major effort to leave behind traditions of violence in both intimate and national and international relations. For instance, the first peace studies came out of Nordic nations. So did a strong men's movement to disentangle, quote, masculinity from its association that we've inherited from domination thinking with control and violence. The third part of this partnership configuration is that in contrast to domination systems where one half of humanity is rigidly subordinated to the other half, here we see a major effort toward more equal partnership between the female and male halves of humanity. So women are approximately 40%, 40%, of the national legislature, much higher than we have here. And with this came greater support for more caring policies, not only by women but by men. All of which takes me to the fifth action, making the gender connection, showing how gender roles, relations, and valuations affect public policy. And of course, and I really want to emphasize this, what we're dealing with is nothing inherent in women or men, but rather than dominator gender stereotypes, which we have all been taught. I mean, we can see that these are just stereotypes, for example, in how many men are now doing fathering in the more hands-on, caregiving way once associated only with mothering. But it is only as the status of women rises and as a mass of women, not just an occasional token woman or even a woman who gets ahead by proving every inch of the way that she's not too soft or feminine, that really become part of social governance, that men no longer feel so threatened in their status, in their, quote, masculinity, when they embrace more stereotypically, quote, feminine values such as caring and nonviolence. And when we talk about gender, we really have to acknowledge that many people find this uncomfortable. But we also need to remind them then, and remind ourselves, of what the great sociologist Lewis Worth observed, that the most important things about a society are those people often don't want to talk about. The fact that we've been taught to think of issues affecting half the population as, quote, just a women's issue, I mean, that's ridiculous, but it reflects how used we are to devaluing women. Our language that we've inherited, the fact that many people still use exclusionary language, mankind, he, man, that too is, and this is not just a matter of political correctness, it's about language that does not devalue, indeed make invisible half the population. We need more inclusive language. In the same way, we've been taught to ignore what otherwise would seem perfectly obvious, that as long as women are subordinated and devalued, so also will stereotypically feminine traits and activities such as caring, caregiving, nonviolence be devalued, be it in women or men, be it in business or in social policy. And it's with the urgent need to bring new information and thinking into both business and social policy, the sixth action, that I want to close. It's up to us, to every one of us, to send not just an occasional message, but a steady drumbeat of new information and new thinking to our business and political leaders so they can connect the dots, so they can more effectively and humanely address our growing economic, environmental, and social challenges, including how the construction of gender roles and relations impacts economics. Take, for example, poverty and hunger. We're not used to thinking of it this way, but consider that in the United States, which has in the last decades, unfortunately, we've seen a backtracking in the raising of the status of women. Hopefully we're going to turn this around now. But at the same time, we also saw something else, a failure to invest in caring for people. Consider that we have now the highest poverty rates of any industrialized nation, and that didn't used to be the case. By contrast, Nordic nations, where the status of women is higher and caring is valued, nations that are not capitalist or socialist, they have both a market and government planning, nations that often call themselves caring societies, they have very low poverty rates. Not only that, Nordic nations have very low poverty rates for woman-headed families, while the U.S. has very high ones. So the problem here is not, as we're often told, the woman-headed family. The problem is uncaring policies. Moreover, in the United States, women over the age of 65 are twice as likely to be poor as men over 65, according to U.S. Census statistics. And this isn't only because of job discrimination, which we're finally hearing more about. It's because most of these women are or were caregivers, whether full or part-time, and current policies do not reward, but rather punish this work with poverty. Indeed, worldwide, women are 70%, 70% of those living in absolute poverty, which means starvation or near starvation. Clearly, if policymakers are to effectively address chronic poverty and hunger, they've got to pay attention to this. They also have to pay attention to cross-cultural studies showing a very strong correlation between the status of women and the nation's quality of life and long-term economic success. In the study, Women, Men, and the Global Quality of Life, our Center for Partnership Studies compared statistical measures from 89 nations on the status of women with measures of quality of life such as infant mortality, human rights ratings, environmental ratings. And we found that in significant respects, the status of women can be a better predictor of quality of life than GDP. Other studies show the same about economic progress. The World Values Surveys, the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap reports. Policymakers need this kind of information, and it's up to us, it's up to you to get it to them. So I invite you to join us in our Caring Economics campaign. There's some great handouts posted on our website, www.partnershipway.org, with more detail on the six actions I've briefly covered today. 1, make the economic case for caring. 2, change measures of economic health. 3, rethink value. 4, accelerate the shift from domination to partnership systems. 5, make the gender connection. 6, change business and social policy. You can all, every one of you, be change agents to move us to a caring economics. And there's so many ways you can do it. Here's just 4 examples. 1, encourage your organizations to sign on to the State of Society report and to join in our Caring Economics campaign. 2, enroll in our forthcoming online training program to certify real wealth conversation leaders. And you can get information on our website, or you can email Sarah at center@partnershipway.org. And becoming a certified real wealth leader will not only allow you to learn a great deal and to bring important information to many people, but it'll also look good on your resume. And yes, ask your organizations, the organizations you belong to have them offer this certification program to their members as a benefit working with us at CPS. 3, invite your friends and colleagues to read The Real Wealth of Nations. It's really a toolkit for action. Start study and action groups. There are materials on the website at partnershipway.org developed by people who form such groups. And yes, also use the recording of this webinar, which is posted on our website, or will be posted on our website. 4, make a financial donation to the Center for Partnership Studies. We need funding to carry out our work, and we just got a challenge grant, so every donation will be doubled. Whatever way you do it, become involved. As the old saying goes, don't agonize, organize. Let's remember what Margaret Mead observed, that the only thing that ever brought positive change was a small, dedicated group of women and men. Let's remember that economic systems are human creations. They have changed and they will change, but only if we do our part. So let's join together and make a difference. Let's do it for ourselves, for our children, and for generations to come. I thank you.